We've talked about 4 different ways to control your exposure. We talked about using the iris to control your f-stop. We talked about shutter speed. We talked about ISO. We even talked about using neutral density filters. And along the way, I might have talked a little bit in passing about how to evaluate the exposure, but let's really talk about that now. How do I evaluate my exposure? How do I know that my image is properly exposed? Okay, that's a fair question, and there are a few answers to it. So let's take a look at some of the tools this thing offers. Now, first and foremost, don't trust your eyes. When you're looking at the LCD screen, or even if you're holding the camera up to your eyeball, don't trust your eyes to make critical evaluations about the brightness, because you're looking at second generation information, right? You're looking at a computer screen that's already been redrawn once by the internal computer on the camera, and then you're making a subjective judgment. Do I think it's bright enough? Do I think it's not bright enough? And if you're standing out in the sunshine and you're wrapping your face around trying to see the LCD screen on the back, or even if you've got it pressed up to your eye and you're still having a hard time telling, that's not the way to do this. There are tools built into the camera that are the way to do this. So let's take a look at a couple of them that you can use while you're shooting. And then in the next video, we'll talk about playing the pictures back and evaluating them after the fact. All right. So I have brought my 3 friends up here onto the table where the light's a little bit better and we can get a better view of them. And you can see that I've got my camera pointing generally at them here, and I've got a nice clean field of view. And I'm going to do what I just told you not to do and trust my eyeballs here. Okay. So let's pretend that that's a proper exposure, or not. So this is what I'm seeing when I look through my viewfinder, or when I look at the screen on the back of the camera. I've got an image here without a whole lot of information, although you saw that as I was turning the controls that things were popping up. Now, again, I'm going to remind you that if I push the info button on the back of the camera here, I can scroll through additional information. So if I push it once, this screen pops up. If I push it a second time, a third time, a fourth time, it takes me back around to where I started. So on this first screen, there are actually 2 different light metering devices. At the very bottom of the screen, just right of center, there is a light meter. And right now it's telling me it thinks I'm 0.7 stops overexposed. Above it is a block that looks like a silhouette of a mountain range, and that's called a histogram. Now, for the moment, let's just take a look at the light meter. Right now, it's telling me that I'm a little bit overexposed, somewhere between 0.7 and 1 stop, depending on how much the camera is wiggling. Right, so I can really choose a number of ways to bring that down. I could grab my iris and close down my aperture a little bit by 1/3 of a stop, by 2/3 of a stop, and there we go. So right now the light meter thinks this is properly exposed. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take that picture. Okay, we'll take a look at that later. Now, this is not a bad place to start. The light meter makes certain assumptions that might be wrong. It assumes that you're looking at an average picture, that the overall brightness is average, that on average there's highlights and dark spots. So if you were pointing at something that was all bright, say you were talking about taking a picture of a person on a sandy beach in high sun, right? Everything is going to be screamingly bright. There's nothing average in that exposure. In that case, the light meter would lie to you. It would have you dial to the center and your picture would not be properly exposed. It would be off a fair bit because the light meter didn't understand what was going on. Likewise, if you're in a very dark space, the light meter would lie to you in the opposite direction. So you're going to end up with pictures that aren't properly exposed if you just trust the light meter. But it is a good place to begin. And sitting here where I am is probably just fine. It's probably pretty accurate. Now I'm going to push my info button. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to sit here and run the shutter speed up and down a little bit so you can see what changes. Now, in this particular mode, I've got options turned on. So you see that as it starts to get really overexposed, I get this glowing patch of kind of orangey red on top of parts of Buzz Lightyear. The camera is telling me that this is overexposed. And if I go the other direction too far, you'll see I start getting these blue luminous patches. This is the camera telling me that these areas are terribly underexposed. There's no detail in them. Those are options that you can turn on and off in the menu, but pretty much they're only useful for telling you you've got things really out of whack. All right, so I'm going to use the info button to scroll forward until I come back around to having the histogram on the screen. Let's take a moment and look at what a histogram is before we go any farther. Now, it's a graph, and as you look from left to right, the left side of the graph represents black. The right side of the graph represents white. So as you move from left to right across that rectangle, it's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. Now, how tall that graph is at any given spot tells you what percentage of your picture is that brightness. Okay? So if you have stuff pushed over against the left, the absolute left of the screen is black. The left 1/3, you're generally talking about your shadows. The center 1/3, you're looking at midtones. And the right 1/3, you're looking at your highlights. And then the absolute right-hand side is white. Okay, so let's take a look at this picture. Now, what I want to, at least as a starting point, is I want my histogram to be centered. I don't want it pushed against the left side of the screen. I don't want it pushed against the right side of the screen, which is conditional, right? If I'm doing something extreme, if I'm in a very bright area, maybe it should be pushed to the right. If I'm in a very dark area, maybe it should be pushed to the left. But I'm in a nice average area here. There's decent lighting on my 3 action figures, and it should be centered. So you'll notice that even though I have the histogram spread out so that it covers pretty much the whole histogram without bunching up to either side, the light meter thinks I'm overexposed. So this is why you have to be a little bit careful. These two things are different ways of looking at the same information. I rely on the histogram more than on the light meter. And in this particular case, I like what it's telling me. I like the fact that the image is spread out all the way from light to dark. Oop, you can see the shadow of my hand there. Now let's just take a look at what happens as I start to get this wrong. I'm going to take my shutter speed and start speeding it up. And as I speed it up, my picture is going to get darker, and you're going to watch the histogram move farther and farther to the left. And it's kind of hard to see. If you lean in close and peer, you'll see that on the very left-hand edge, there's actually a blue vertical line. That blue vertical line means there's stuff there that is completely black. Completely black means it's completely black. I can't fix that. I can't make it brighter in Photoshop. It will never be other than completely black. So for this picture, this is really quite too dark. All right, so I'm going to start slowing my shutter speed down, and you'll see that that histogram starts to spread back out, and we're heading into an area that's probably more or less properly exposed. But if I just keep going, you'll see that that histogram starts piling up on the right. And there's a little green line that's popped up over there on the side that's telling me there's stuff here that is completely overexposed. And there's an awful lot in that picture that's hanging out on the right-hand side. This image just shouldn't be that bright. This is probably terribly overexposed. So I'm going to bring that back down. And again, for this image, what I'm interested in is using as much of that histogram as I can. It shouldn't be crammed to the right. It shouldn't be compressed against the left. It should be spread out as much as possible. Now, that might not always be possible. Maybe if I shift over here so that my laptop is in the background. Right, that laptop is really quite bright if it doesn't go to sleep. And that's going to change right? So if I'm looking this way, look at my histogram. It's nice and evenly spread out, and there's not just a whole lot going on in terms of crazy bright spots or crazy dark spots. It's evenly distributed from left to right, more or less. If I shift over here and get that laptop in the back, look at how that changes. Look at how much more is piling up in the highlights. Nothing's overexposed yet, which is fine, which surprises me just a little bit. I thought my laptop screen was brighter than that, but you can see how it did change. Okay, so just using the camera, and this is 3 different things that we can trust. We have the light meter, which is going to put us in the ballpark. If you center that light meter up, you're probably doing okay. We have that little flashy thing that is a camera option you can turn on and off. It's buried in the menu. We'll get to that later. And that just is telling you, hey, pay attention to these areas. These areas are either terribly overexposed or terribly underexposed, and there's not going to be any detail left in them. And then we have the histogram. The histogram is going to give you the most information. And again, generally speaking, what you want to do is just make sure that that histogram is spread out in the middle. It shouldn't be piled up to the left. It shouldn't be piled up to the right, unless you're shooting an extreme subject. If you're shooting a very bright subject, it should be piled up to the right a bit. If you're shooting a very dark subject in a very dark space, it should be piled up to the left a little bit. You have to mix your brain with what the meter's telling you as well. The other thing we can talk about real quick, since we're talking about evaluating, is focus. It can be awfully hard to tell whether or not an image is in focus. If you're using the automatic focus, that's fine. But if you're focusing manually, you have to trust your eye, and that's not always a good idea. There's 2 things that we can do. There's a menu setting called peaking. And what will happen is if it's set to manual focus and I start to focus, you'll see that these little red lines pop up. The red lines tell me what's in focus. So as I'm turning my manual focus, you can see that Venom is getting really nice and covered with red. And then as I keep going, nothing is. Let me move over here so the laptop's in the background. All right, so you can see the little red starting to crawl around the keyboard of my laptop. Right, and now my laptop screen is in focus. You see how the red is rewriting the text on the screen. So the peaking is telling me that that's in focus. And as soon as I stop touching the focus dial, that's why it's disappearing. Right, so now if I come back the other way, you can watch the red start to crawl into Spider-Man. And then up here into Buzz Lightyear. So peaking is one way that when you're using manual focus, you can be pretty sure it's in focus. Right now, I've got lots of peaking there on Venom and whatnot. The other way, I don't know if you remember, but when we were first talking about this camera, I pointed out that on the top near the shutter release were 2 buttons, one of which is a magnifying glass. That magnifying glass allows you to digitally zoom in just the viewfinder. Right? So if I push that magnifying glass, it zooms in. And this isn't going to record that way. I'd still take a picture just like this, right? But when I push that button, it zooms way in. I can control how far it zooms in by using this wheel on the back. Once I've zoomed in, and you can actually see there's a magnifying glass on this wheel. This is the same wheel that would be shutter speed. I can dial that shutter speed back and forth to change how far my zoom is. And I can actually, by using the up, down, left, right buttons, I can drive around inside the picture. And now that I can see something Space Ranger, I can really get the focus in. I've got peaking turned on so that the red pops up as well. It really helps with my aging eyes. And then to get back out of it, I'm just going to press that magnifying glass again. So I've got tools that will help me evaluate my exposure and my focus all before I push the button. In the next lesson, we're going to look at the playback system and how we can look at a picture after the fact and get even more information about it.